Hey there, welcome to First Look. Uh, Fancy Mike Week 2 edition. Uh, so far so good. I got good feedback, pun intended. I got good feedback on the mic. And anyway, I'm hoping that it continues to work for folks. And like I said, once we kind of get we're slowly working on little improvements to what I do here. So we'll keep you up to date. I know you're all on the edge of your seat about those updates. All right, so this week, well, first of all, before we get into this week, let's just sort of pause and be grateful for the week that we had. If you were able to be in worship or you were able to worship with us online, you got to experience something that I think is pretty unique in the life of the church. As you know, this is our centennial year. In January, it'll be 100 years since Northmont was an official congregation of the Presbytery, and so this year leading up to it is like the year that got us ready to be that. And we've started a sermon series of folks who have come through Northmont, pastors. We'll have associates, youth people, different folks. And yesterday was Dave Antonson, who is as much built into the fabric of Northmont over the last 40 years as anybody. And well, Bill Goff. He and Bill Goff are for the last 40 at least, are the two guys that really are the staples of the church. And so Dave was here and flew in and was, just made it a really special day and shared a lot of his time and memories of this place, and a little bit about incorporating that into the sermon and then moving into communion, and being able to do that with him was really special. And so I was very grateful for all that, and all of you were very welcoming in all the ways that you would expect. And I know that he walked away feeling just your love and presence with him in a really meaningful way. And it was great to see that Judy was able to join him, and to I know all of you have all of these different types of interactions with them, and so that was great. Susan Meyer, who was an associate, obviously was here also, here during his tenure, and that was wonderful, and we're going to hopefully hear from her later in the series. And so we also had the granddaughter of the original pastor, whose name was Roderick Smith. So Carol and her husband Jim were here, and they have recently moved to eastern Pennsylvania, and came in for the day and brought like artifacts from Reverend Smith's time, and that was just to have all that kind of happen on one Sunday was pretty special. So we're very, very grateful for that, and it was just a really, really special day. And so moving forward, just so you know, or reminded kind of where we're headed, the next one that we have scheduled is Tyler Domsky. So Tyler was the associate pastor almost 10 years ago, I think 8 or 9 years ago. And so he's obviously at Wexford, and he and I are going to be switching pulpits, but that's not until June 1st. So just know that that's coming down the pike. And then we have scheduled other folks, again, Susan Meyer, Brian Wallace, Jessica McClure Archer, who's the executive presbyter. We also have Brian Kelly, and I might be, those are the people we have scheduled and confirmed so far. So we have a couple of other people we're trying to figure out if they can be a part of it. So we're kind of working towards that. And then, of course, we have a couple of events that we're working on as well, and so we'll make you aware of those very soon. But anyway, we're marching along with this 100th anniversary celebration. So thank you for all who are making that possible. So this Sunday, we have a couple of very cool things happening. First, obviously, it's Mother's Day, and we know that that brings joy and fond memories, but also, a little, some melancholy, some sadness, some, missing. That is a part of it for sure, and we want to honor the fact that that's true for many people, but just the fact that it's also for others, a very fond memories kind of day. So there's that element to it, but we also have some new members who are joining, and so we'll send you some information about that. Some people who have been kind of joining us and rejoining us in the last couple of months, and so we're excited about that too. So yeah, that's coming up this week, and the passage that goes along with it is we're kind of at that stage of the Easter season where it becomes a little retrospective, meaning we start to look at some of the things that Jesus was in his life leading up to Holy Week, kind of revisit it with a fresh set of eyes. Like the lectionary intentionally does that. We're supposed to be able to see the person of Jesus, the teacher, the pastor, the Son of God, just from a different lens, because we know that Easter has happened. So this past week, Dave went through the disciples joining him on the beach for breakfast, that kind of meal, which obviously makes sense for communion. And so this coming week, what we revisit is the idea of Jesus as shepherd. And one of the things I was kind of thumbing through as I do, just to kind of get an idea of not only what the passage was, but what the title was, because I come up with these titles, the texts and the titles, usually a few months ahead of time, just to give the music folks and the staff kind of a heads up as to where things are headed, so they can do their own planning. And this week, I realized that I named the sermon "Allergic to Wool," and I think I had a couple of different ideas about that. I'll have to, given how specific and unique that kind of title is, my gut says I'll probably incorporate that into the sermon. I don't know exactly where it'll go yet, but I know that idea will be something that I incorporate. And I know that the reason I chose that particular sermon title, which, Jesus is shepherd and then allergic to wool, is the concept of, I think one of the things that I find fascinating and helpful as I'm thinking about my own faith journey and thinking about the church in general and that kind of thing, is the expectations that I think we put around ourselves for church and our relationship with God and our relationship with faith to be really natural and make sense to us all the time. But when in reality, faith in church and our religious upbringing or our understanding of what our faith should look like, our understanding of who God is and our relationship to God is sometimes feels very foreign, feels very other. It doesn't always feel like we know who God is or God knows who we are. Sometimes the culture of church can feel very foreign, and I draw off of my own kind of experience with that. There was, as a child, church didn't make a lot of sense to me. The people who were in it didn't make a lot of sense to me. The culture and mannerisms and things they cared about and ways of being just seemed very foreign to me. And that made God feel very foreign to me. And it took some intentional kind of work on my part for that to improve. But it also, came with people really investing in me as a teenager. And the idea of like sort of funny to think about if you were a sheep who was allergic to wool, what would it be like to just be uncomfortable in your own skin all the time? That idea resonated with me, and I thought, well, somewhere in there, I'm assuming will be a focus. So those are the kinds of things that I was thinking of. So let me give you the passage that this is connected to. So John 10, we were in like John 20, 21, that thing. And so that now we kind of like zip backwards and start to look at different spots in Jesus' ministry through the lens of resurrection. So the first, chapter 10 of John, verses 1 through, 21. That's Jesus as the Good Shepherd, right? So that whole idea kind of comes into play. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. So it kind of goes through different analogies of the Good Shepherd. So then we move from there to the second half, and it's Jesus being rejected. And so it kind of looks at Jesus as shepherd through the eyes of those who would reject him. So 22 through 30, let me double check. Yeah, 22 through 30. Here's what this says. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of my Father's hand. The Father and I are one." Okay. So a couple of things that you kind of see happening in that passage. Let me start with the last phrase and kind of work my way back. So the Father and I are one. It's tempting to kind of bypass that particular thought, just because we know that that's true, and so Jesus saying it doesn't change much for us. But if you think about it, the declaration of that is humongous, right? And in light of Easter, I think is even bigger. So again, you got to remember that the concept of Jesus being one with God was foreign, and even the idea that Jesus was the Messiah was different than Jesus being God. And so the fact that we have in this particular snapshot Jesus declaring his oneness with God is a big deal. And I don't know how you could wrap your mind around that exactly, but that is, a part of where Jesus is in explaining his influence. And so if we look at that in hindsight, and I always take this time of Easter as like I'm thinking about it as a disciple. I often try to look at it like that. When they must have taken these different times of being with Jesus and seen it differently because of the resurrection. So I think this is one of those moments when you almost get a glimpse into that, in this like flashback kind of idea. And so they must have thought to themselves, if Jesus is one with God, this is who he is. He's the shepherd. He's all these things at once. Then why on earth? I wish I would have conceptualized that differently, because this resurrection thing wouldn't have taken me by surprise. So that's kind of the first piece that I looked at. The second piece is Jesus being rejected by people who could have accepted him, and they're just not getting it, not understanding it. And again, the disciples must see that idea very differently post-resurrection, because at the time they probably judged the people for not understanding what Jesus was trying to say. Like, I've heard Jesus' voice. I dropped my nets and followed him. I've been with him every day for 3 years. I've accepted this. I've moved on it. I've made my life all about this, and you folks have not, right? So drawing a distinction between the people who understood who Jesus was and what he was trying to accomplish, and those who rejected it, right? So if you're a disciple, maybe you're not doing it intentionally, but there is some kind of at least subtle disparity between you and the people who don't get it. But then you get to a place where you're reflecting on the resurrection, and you rejected him on Thursday and saw him die on Friday, and then were scared and everything, and then shocked to see him on Sunday. You must have started to feel like much closer to those people who rejected him than you did before. At least that's my thought, that kind of thing could be running through your head. Like, I judged these people for not understanding who Jesus was, and yet I didn't understand who he was. Maybe I understood differently than them, but like at the end of the day, we all missed it. So there's that kind of element. And then the last piece is just, what does it mean to hear Christ's voice or not? What does it mean to understand who Jesus is or not? What does it mean to be in the shoes of people who are struggling with accepting the concept of the Messiah? And I've thought about this obviously from a lot of different angles. And if you talk to people who don't go to church, or who maybe the people who used to go to church and don't anymore, whenever I talk to them, or when sometimes people will just mention it to you in conversation or whatever, I have never in my life met a person who said, I stopped attending church, I fell out of that part of my life because I heard the teachings of Jesus and didn't like them. I've never heard anyone, and if it's true, then I've never heard it. It could be, but that's not what people say. You talk to people who were a part of the church on any kind of place, and you talk to them about Jesus specifically. Everyone very commonly, I don't want to say universally, has the same kind of idea of Jesus. Jesus specifically, everyone that I've ever talked to is in favor of. Loves the poor and the other, and heals people and loves, draws people in, and is a truth teller, and is compassionate and empathetic, and all those things, all the things we know Jesus to be. Now, I have met people who have strong feelings about the idea of the nature of God that we attach to the one who creates, right? The Father, if you want to say, okay. That idea of God, for some people, is harder because of two reasons. One, anywhere in the Bible where it looks like the people are being rejected or dismissed or harmed or wiped out, or anything on the smiting scale, right? If you associate God with one who smites, then that's obviously a big negative. So the concept of God as one who separates or divides or harms, people do have an issue with that concept. They also have a concept of, or a hard time with the idea of God who knows everything, can do everything, can control everything, and yet seems to not, right? In the same way that you saw like Martha and Mary sort of sad about Lazarus. If you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Like, why do storms and tornadoes and hurricanes and cancer happen, right? And as a pastor, you spend a lot of time working through that with people. So those ideas, the omnipotent God who seems to control or not control on a whim, is often rejected. But the person or the philosophy, the presence of Jesus Christ in the world, just isolated. I've never heard anyone say, that's awful. I can't love, I can't be in a relationship, I can't follow those ideas. Those ideas I reject. Sometimes the concept of a bodily resurrection is something that people struggle with, but the teachings of Jesus, we can get into the finer points of divinity, but the teachings of Jesus, people by and large are in favor of. It's church that people have, if they have an allergy to something, church is, I think, the bigger culprit. And you've heard me talk about that before. That's not new. I have, very real critiques of who we are as the church. I'm as much the church as anybody else. And people have struggles with that. And either because they weren't cared for by the church, or they've seen the church abuse others or reject others, or seem like a very exclusive club that's very judgy. Like, whatever it happens to be, people have issues with church. But the concept of God, I think, is a distant second, but it's still there. But the person of Jesus, people seem to connect with. And if anything, if people on the outside have a problem with Jesus, it's that Jesus doesn't seem to universally connect with churchgoers. That's another critique I hear often, is that the people in the church who talk about Jesus all the time don't seem to follow who he is, what he cared about, what he stood for. They seem to reject that in their own lives. Or they don't prioritize those things when it comes to faith. So that's an element that you hear about often. And I think especially I think when we're receiving new members, I think it's good for us to have a real honest conversation with ourselves about who the church is, how we can continue to care for people whenever they, sign up to be a part of this community in a very intentional way, and what it means for us to continue to be those who love people around us. Again, I don't know exactly where all that goes, but I think it's a big part of the way I understand this text. So that's where I think I'm headed this week. So hopefully that will connect with you and you can reflect on that yourself. Okay. I think that's all I have for this week. I do want to thank you for, again, for making this past week happen. Looking forward to this coming Sunday with Mother's Day and with new members and all those things that come with it. Again, we'll keep you up to date on the sermon series and some other events that are coming up very soon. So I hope you, in the meantime, have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time for another First Look. So take care.